It all started with a message from the stars, a summons, really. Humanity had only just cracked the code of faster-than-light travel. We'd barely set foot on a few nearby worlds when the call came. Appear before the Galactic Council. No explanation, no warning. Just a cold, formal directive beamed to every government on Earth and our fledgling colonies. People were nervous, hopeful, even proud. After all, being invited to speak with the galaxy's oldest civilizations felt like a rite of passage, like finally being accepted into the big leagues. Earth's best diplomats, scientists, and representatives from every nation boarded the newly built starship Horizon, painted white with the blue marble of Earth on its side, and made the long jump to the council seat near the galactic core. What they found wasn't a welcoming committee. It was a courtroom. The chamber was massive, carved from what looked like living crystal, filled with beings so alien they barely resembled life as humans understood it. Some floated, some pulsed with light, others sat like statues made of shadow. And they all stared, not with curiosity but judgment. The charges came fast and sharp. Humans were too aggressive, too emotional, too unpredictable. We'd terraformed a moon without checking if it hosted microbial life. We'd fired warning shots at a drone that drifted too close to Mars. We argued loudly in public forums, changed leaders every few years, and still carried ancient grudges between nations. To the council, this wasn't progress, it was chaos, our representatives tried to explain. They spoke of how far we'd come, from warring tribes to global cooperation, from burning coal to bending space-time. They talked about art, music, the way humans rebuilt after disasters, how we sent probes into the unknown just to learn, not to conquer. But the council wasn't impressed. To them, humanity was a toddler with a flamethrower, dangerous not because we wanted to destroy, but because we didn't yet understand our own strength. Then came the verdict. No trial, no appeal. Just a sentence delivered in calm, measured tones that felt colder than deep space. Exile. All human colonies beyond the solar system were to be abandoned within 6 months. Every ship with FTL capability would be confiscated or disabled. Earth and its system would be sealed off by an energy barrier, permanent, unbreakable, and monitored. We were not to leave. We were not to signal. We were, in every meaningful way, erased from the galactic map. The humans aboard the Horizon didn't argue. They didn't beg. They simply stood in silence as the Council's enforcers escorted them back to their ship. On the journey home, no one spoke for days. The view of Earth growing larger through the viewport should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt like watching a prison come into focus. Back on Earth, the news hit like a tidal wave. Panic, anger, despair, every emotion you'd expect. Some called for resistance, for building secret fleets and fighting back. Others collapsed into hopelessness, convinced humanity's story was over before it truly began. Governments scrambled. Economies trembled. Families with loved ones on distant colonies wept, knowing they'd never see them again. But something else stirred beneath the fear. Because humans, for all their flaws, have never been good at accepting limits. While the world mourned, engineers in hidden labs began taking apart every piece of alien tech they'd managed to keep. Scraps from old scout drones, sensor logs, even fragments of council comms. Scientists who once competed for grants now shared data freely, working around the clock in underground bunkers and orbital stations. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, they all pitched in, not because they were ordered to, but because they refused to let this be the end. The council thought they were punishing chaos. What they didn't understand was that chaos in human hands often breeds creativity. For 50 years, Earth went quiet. No signals, no ships, no demands. The galaxy assumed we'd faded into irrelevance, maybe even collapsed under the weight of our own isolation. The council moved on, turning their attention to other species, other problems. They forgot about the little blue world behind the energy wall. But behind that wall, something was growing. Without access to alien hyperdrives or energy cores, humans had to invent everything from scratch. They couldn't copy, they had to imagine. And imagination, it turned out, was one thing the council had underestimated. On Mars, in the dusty red canyons, new shipyards rose inside hollowed-out volcanoes. In the asteroid belt, automated factories spun out hulls from nickel iron ore. On the dark side of the moon, physicists tested theories that would have been laughed out of any galactic academy. Ideas about folding space, not with exotic matter, but with focused gravity waves generated by spinning black holes the size of marbles. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't perfect. But it was theirs. And while the galaxy slept, humanity built not just ships, but a new way of thinking. They learned to work together not because a treaty forced them to, but because survival demanded it. Old rivalries faded. Resources were shared. Knowledge became the most valuable currency. The Council had exiled humans to teach them humility. Instead, they gave them time, and time in human hands became a forge. No one knew when the silence would break. But everyone knew it would, because humans don't stay quiet forever, especially when they've been told they don't belong. And deep in the void, beyond the reach of the Council's sensors, the first true human-built starship, sleek, silent, powered by a drive no alien mind had ever conceived, powered up its engines, not for war, not for revenge, but for return. The galaxy had written humanity's obituary too soon, and the next chapter? That was going to be written in human hands. The moment the energy barrier snapped into place around the solar system, it felt like the universe had slammed a door in humanity's face. 1 minute, Earth was reaching for the stars, building outposts on Europa, mining helium-3 from Saturn's rings, sending cultural exchanges to newly contacted worlds. The next, everything beyond Mars was off limits. All FTL drives were seized or disabled. Colonists stranded on distant moons were given a cruel choice: return to Earth or be left behind forever. Most chose to come home, hearts heavy, eyes full of questions. At first, it seemed like the end. Economies crashed. Space programs shut down. People stared at the night sky not with wonder, but with a quiet grief. The dream of becoming a spacefaring civilization shattered in a single decree. But humans have a strange habit. When backed into a corner, they don't curl up. They dig. Without alien tech to lean on, Earth had to rely on what it always had: raw ingenuity, stubbornness, and the kind of teamwork that only comes when survival is on the line. Governments that once bickered over borders now shared power grids, food supplies, and research data. Old military bases became innovation hubs. Universities turned into 24-hour think tanks. Even kids in classrooms were sketching starship designs not as fantasy, but as homework. The biggest problem? Faster than light travel. The Council had taken everything: engines, navigation cores, even the theoretical blueprints. But they hadn't taken human memory. And in the minds of a few dozen engineers who'd worked on early FTL prototypes, fragments remained. Not enough to rebuild, but enough to start asking new questions. Instead of trying to copy what the aliens used, humans began from scratch. What if we're thinking about space all wrong? Someone asked during a late-night session in a repurposed subway tunnel beneath Tokyo. That question sparked a revolution. While the rest of the galaxy assumed Earth was rotting in isolation, something incredible was happening in the shadows. On the far side of the moon, shielded from prying eyes, even from the Council's distant sensors, a team of physicists and engineers built a test chamber the size of a city block. Inside, they didn't use exotic crystals or plasma conduits. They used supercooled magnets, quantum processors made from recycled satellite parts, and a wild idea. What if you didn't move through space, but made space itself move around you? It took years, dozens of failed tests, explosions that lit up the lunar surface like silent fireworks. But then, one quiet Tuesday in 2261, a tiny probe, no bigger than a shoebox, vanished from the chamber and reappeared 3 seconds later. 1.2 million kilometers away near Jupiter's orbit. No warp bubble. No distortion field. Just a clean, instantaneous jump. They'd done it. Not by borrowing alien science, but by reimagining physics in a way only humans could. Messy, intuitive, and daring. News of the breakthrough didn't spread through official channels. It spread through whispers, coded messages, and encrypted data burst between hidden labs. Suddenly, every scrapyard, every abandoned factory, every underground bunker had a purpose. Mars, once a scientific outpost, became humanity's secret shipyard. Using autonomous drones and 3D printers fed by asteroid ore, they began constructing vessels unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Sleek, modular, powered by compact gravity drives that hummed like a heartbeat. Life on Earth changed too. With space travel off the table for decades, people turned inward, but not in a bad way. Cities were redesigned to be self-sustaining. Vertical farms fed millions. Clean fusion energy became as common as light bulbs. Art, music, and storytelling flourished. not as distractions, but as reminders of who they were, a species that dreamed even when locked in a cage. And through it all, one unspoken promise held everything together. We're coming back, not to fight, not to prove a point, but to show the galaxy that being human wasn't a flaw, it was a feature. 50 years passed. Generations were born who'd never seen an alien, never heard a galactic broadcast, never stepped foot on a world beyond the solar system. Yet they grew up hearing the stories of the exile, the silence, the quiet rebellion in labs and shipyards. They didn't see themselves as prisoners. They saw themselves as pioneers waiting for the right moment. That moment came when the first full-scale human starship, built entirely from scratch, powered up its core in the silent void between Neptune and the Kuiper Belt. It had no weapons, just speed, stealth, and a communication array capable of broadcasting across light years. The crew wasn't soldiers. They were scientists, linguists, historians, and pilots who'd trained their whole lives for one mission: to re-enter the galaxy not as beggars, but as equals. The ship's name wasn't grand or dramatic. It was simply called Voyager 2, a nod to the old probes that once carried humanity's message into the unknown. Only this time, the message wasn't on a golden record. It was in the ship itself, in its design, its power, its very existence. As it approached the edge of the solar system, the crew paused. The energy barrier still shimmered in the distance, a ghostly wall of light that had kept them isolated for half a century. But this time they didn't need to break it. Their new drive didn't punch through barriers. It slipped between the cracks of space-time itself. With a soft hum that no one in the galaxy could hear, the Voyager 2 vanished, and just like that, the silence ended. The galaxy had forgotten about humanity. They'd moved on, assumed Earth had faded into myth or ruin. But out there, in the endless dark, a human-made ship was already streaking toward the nearest trade route, carrying not weapons or demands, but a simple, powerful truth. We're still here. And we built something beautiful while you weren't looking. The Council had exiled humans to teach them their place. Instead, they gave them the one thing no empire can buy: time to become something greater than they ever imagined. And now, after 50 years of quiet work, humanity was ready to step back onto the galactic stage, not as outcasts, but as creators. Not as students, but as peers. The long silence was over. The next chapter had just begun. The first sign that something had changed wasn't a battle cry or a declaration of war. It was silence, followed by a single calm transmission that popped up on every major galactic comm channel without warning. No encryption, no threat, just a clear, steady voice speaking in over 24 known languages, one after another. We are no longer exiles. At first, most systems ignored it. Glitches happened. Rogue signals weren't uncommon. But then, near the Kesuri Trade Corridor, a busy stretch of space where merchant fleets from a dozen species crossed paths daily, a ship appeared. Not from a jump gate, not from a warp tunnel. It just materialized, sleek, dark gray, shaped like a blade turned on its side, with no visible weapons, no flashing lights, no markings except a small, simple emblem on its hull, a blue circle with a white swirl, Earth's oceans seen from space. Panic rippled through the corridor. Alarms blared on freighters. Patrol drones scrambled. The local defense fleet powered up their weapons, ready to blast this unknown intruder out of existence. But before anyone could fire, the ship sent another message, this time not words but data. Star charts, navigation logs, engineering schematics, all human-made. All proof that this wasn't a stolen vessel or a trick. It was real, and it was theirs. Then came the real shock, when the Xanthari hegemony, a proud, ancient species known for their rigid honor codes and massive war fleets, sent 3 of their fastest cruisers to intercept the human ship near Proxima. They expected resistance. What they got was something else entirely. The human vessel didn't flee. It didn't raise shields. It simply pulsed once, a low-frequency energy wave that swept through the Xanthari ships like a sigh. In an instant, every system on all 3 cruisers went dark. Engines off, comms dead, weapons frozen. Not damaged, just switched off. Like someone had unplugged them. For 10 full minutes, the Xanthari crews floated in silent, powerless ships, hearts pounding, waiting for the killing blow. But none came. Instead, the human ship broadcast a new message. Your systems will reboot in 60 seconds. We mean no harm. We only ask to be seen. When power returned, the human ship was already gone, vanished again as quietly as it had arrived. That moment changed everything. News spread faster than any warp drive. Species that had dismissed humans as primitive children now whispered in awe. How had they done it? Their tech wasn't just different, it was smarter, cleaner, more precise. While the galaxy relied on brute force and massive energy outputs, humans had built tools that worked with the universe, not against it. Within weeks, more human ships appeared, not dozens, not hundreds, but just enough to be noticed. They showed up near abandoned mining colonies humans had been forced to leave decades ago. They didn't attack. They didn't demand. They simply landed, repaired old habitats, reactivated water purifiers, and left behind food, medicine, and open comms channels. Anyone, alien or human descended, was welcome to stay, leave, or ask for help. No strings attached. The council watched, stunned and uneasy. They'd expected rage, retaliation. Instead, they got generosity wrapped in quiet confidence. Then came the real test. A dying star in the outer rim, once stable, now collapsing, threatened to swallow 3 inhabited worlds. The local species had begged the council for help for months, but the rescue fleets were delayed by protocol reviews. Then, without warning, 3 human vessels arrived. They didn't ask permission. They didn't consult treaties. They just got to work. Using massive orbital mirrors and gravity lens arrays no one had ever seen before, they stabilized the star's core just enough to buy time. Evacuation ships, human-built, human-piloted, ferried over 2 million beings to safety in under a week. When asked why they'd risk so much for strangers, the human commander simply said, because someone had to. That act alone turned the tide of galactic opinion. Species that had once sided with the council now questioned their judgment. If humans could do all this after 50 years of isolation, what else were they capable of? And then the final blow to the old order. Human ships began bypassing council-controlled space entirely. They opened new trade routes using their unique drives, linking systems that had been cut off for centuries. They shared medical tech that cured diseases the galaxy had long accepted as incurable. They taught alien engineers how to build clean energy grids from local materials. Everywhere they went, they left not conquest, but connection. The council tried to respond. They issued warnings. Demanded humans return to their quarantine zone. But this time no one listened, not even their own member species. The Velnari, once loyal enforcers of the conquered, quietly opened diplomatic channels with Earth. The Kasari merchants started trading with human freighters. Even the Zenthari, humbled by their earlier encounter, sent observers, not soldiers, to study human methods. Because the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Humanity hadn't just survived exile. They'd used it. While the galaxy rested on its ancient laurels, humans had reinvented themselves. They hadn't copied. They hadn't begged. They'd built something new, something that worked. And the most unsettling part for the old powers. Humans weren't even trying to take over. They weren't hoarding their tech or demanding tribute. They offered it freely with one condition: treat us like equals. Not inferiors, not threats, just people. The galaxy had spent centuries believing civilization meant conformity, follow the rules, respect the hierarchy, never rock the boat. But humans showed them another way, that progress doesn't come from waiting for permission. It comes from doing what's right, even when no one's watching. By the time the first human delegation arrived at the ruins of the old council chamber, not as petitioners, but as guests invited by a dozen former member species, the message was clear. The age of exile was over. The age of human contribution had begun, and the galaxy for the first time in millennia had something new to learn. Not from gods or elders, but from the species they'd once thrown away like trash. Funny how that works. Sometimes the door you're slammed out of becomes the one you walk back through, taller, wiser, and carrying gifts for everyone inside. After everything that had happened, the exile, the silence, the return, most expected humanity to take control, to build an empire the old way, with fleets, borders, and laws forced on others. But that's not what happened. Instead, something quieter, deeper, and far more powerful began to spread across the stars. Partnership. It started small. A human medical team landing on a world where a strange fever was killing thousands. They didn't bring soldiers or demands, just crates of nanite-based treatments grown in labs back on Mars and a simple offer: let us help. Within days, the fever broke. Within weeks, local doctors were learning how to make the cure themselves. No patents, no fees, just knowledge shared freely. Then came the energy crisis on the icy moons of Xylos Prime. Their fusion reactors were failing, and winter was coming, a winter that lasted 20 years. Before the Council could even draft a response, human engineers arrived with portable gravity cell generators, small enough to fit in a cargo bay, powerful enough to heat entire cities. They installed them, trained the locals, and left. When asked why they'd do all this for strangers, one of them just smiled and said, "Because cold is cold no matter who's feeling it." That was the pattern. Everywhere humans went, they didn't conquer. They connected. They didn't just hand out tech and walk away. They sat down with alien scientists, farmers, teachers, people, and listened. They learned how other species saw the universe, and in return, they shared how humans saw it. Messy, full of mistakes, but always trying to do better. Human schools opened their virtual classrooms to students from a dozen worlds. Alien philosophers gave lectures on Earth about patience, balance, and long-term thinking. Lessons humans desperately needed. And slowly, something amazing happened. Species that had been rivals for centuries began talking again. Trade routes once blocked by old grudges reopened. Shared research stations popped up in neutral zones, staffed by teams that spoke a dozen languages but worked as one. The old Galactic Council, once seen as the only source of order, now looked stiff, slow, and out of touch. The real turning point came during the Blight Plague, a disease that ate away at organic circuitry, crippling everything from starship controls to hospital systems across 5 systems. The Council's solution? Quarantine the infected worlds and wait it out. But humans saw it differently. They sent bioengineers who'd spent years studying Earth's own pandemics. Working side by side with Velnari geneticists, they developed a living antivirus, a microscopic organism that hunted the blight like a predator, cleaned the systems, and then self-destructed. It worked. Entire civilizations were saved. And again, the cure was shared with no strings attached. People started asking, why are they doing this? The answer wasn't in speeches or manifestos. It was in the way human crews treated everyone they met, not as subjects or threats, but as equals. They didn't act like they had all the answers. In fact, they often said, "We're still learning too." That humility, paired with undeniable skill, earned trust faster than any fleet ever could. Back on Earth, life had changed too. The planet was no longer just a home, it was a crossroads. Alien ships landed not in military zones, but in open fields and public spaceports. Children waved at beings with 6 eyes or shimmering skin. Markets sold food from a dozen worlds. And in universities, human students debated ethics with beings who'd lived for 300 years. But the most powerful message came not from technology or diplomacy, it came from words. When a human representative stood before the ruins of the old council chamber, now a neutral meeting ground, they didn't boast. They didn't gloat. They simply said, "You told us we were too chaotic to belong, too emotional, too unpredictable. And maybe you were right, but that chaos gave us art. That emotion gave us compassion. That unpredictability gave us the courage to try things no one else would." They paused, looking out at the gathered species. Some old allies, some former enemies. "We were cast out for being too human," they continued. "Now we invite you to become a little more human too. Not to copy us, but to remember that it's okay to fail, okay to feel, okay to hope, even when the odds are against you." That speech didn't just echo through comms channels. It sparked something. Species that had spent millennia following rigid traditions began asking new questions. Young aliens started dreaming of building, not just obeying. Old rivalries softened. New alliances formed, not out of fear but shared purpose. The Terran sphere wasn't an empire in the old sense. There was no throne, no capital that ruled all. Instead, it was a network, a web of cooperation where every species kept its voice, its culture, its freedom. Humans didn't lead it. They helped hold it together like one thread in a much larger tapestry. And the best part? It kept growing. When a dying star threatened a remote system, human and Kessari engineers worked together to stabilize it. When a planet's atmosphere began to leak, Velnari terraformers and human climate scientists combined their knowledge to seal the sky. Every success became a story. Every story became a reason to trust a little more. The galaxy had once feared humanity's unpredictability. Now they saw it as a strength, the spark that kept progress alive. While older civilizations had grown careful, even cautious, humans reminded them that sometimes you have to leap before you're ready. And through it all, Earth remained open, not as a symbol of power but as a symbol of possibility, a place where anyone, no matter their origin, could come to learn, heal, or simply sit under the same sky that had once watched a lonely species get thrown out of the stars, only to build a better way back in. The Council had tried to teach humanity a lesson in humility. What they didn't realize was that true humility isn't about staying small. It's about lifting others as you rise, and that's exactly what humans did. Not with force, but with open hands, open minds, and an unshakable belief that everyone deserves a chance to shine. 100 years after the exile, the galaxy looked nothing like it used to. The old Galactic Council was gone, not destroyed, not overthrown, but simply made unnecessary. In its place stood something far more alive. A network of worlds working together, learning from each other, building a future no single species could have imagined alone. And at the heart of it all was Earth, not as a ruler, but as a meeting place, a classroom, a home for ideas. People from dozens of species now walked the streets of cities that once belonged only to humans. You'd see scholars with skin like polished stone debating physics in Tokyo, artists with wings of light painting murals in Rio, engineers with 6 arms helping rebuild coastal towns after storms. Earth wasn't human anymore in the old narrow sense. It had become something bigger, a shared dream. And it all started because someone once said, "You don't belong." That rejection, harsh as it was, forced humanity to dig deep. Without outside help, they had to trust each other. They had to invent, not imitate. They had to ask not just, can we build this? But should we? And for whom? That mindset, practical but thoughtful, bold but kind, became their gift to the galaxy. The Terran Sphere, as it came to be called, wasn't held together by laws or armies. It ran on something far stronger, mutual respect. Every world kept its own way of life. No one was forced to adopt human customs or beliefs. But they all agreed on one thing: progress shouldn't be hoarded. Knowledge should be shared, and no one should be left behind just because they were different. This new way of living showed in small moments. A young alien student, nervous on their first day at a university in Nairobi, being greeted by a human classmate who'd learned their language just to say hello. A farming colony on a distant moon using human-designed water recyclers, alongside native soil techniques to grow food that fed 3 species. A joint mission to map a nebula, crewed by beings who once saw each other as enemies, now laughing over shared meals in zero gravity. Even the ships had changed. Human vessels no longer flew alone. They traveled in mixed fleets, some sleek and fast like human designs, others broad and glowing like Velnari craft, or angular and silent like Zenthari scouts. They didn't need the same tech to work together. They just needed the same goal. And that goal wasn't power. It was understanding. Back on Earth, the planet itself had healed. With the pressure of overconsumption gone and global cooperation finally real, forests regrew, oceans cleared, and cities learned to live with nature instead of against it. Solar panels and wind turbines blended into landscapes. Rooftop gardens fed neighborhoods. Children grew up knowing that caring for the planet wasn't optional. It was part of being human. But the real magic wasn't in the tech or the clean air. It was in the stories. Every night in homes across the galaxy, parents told their kids about the time humans were cast out, and how they didn't give up. How they used silence to build, loneliness to learn, and pain to grow kinder, not bitter. It became a lesson not just for humans, but for everyone. That being told you're not enough doesn't have to be the end. Sometimes it's the beginning of something greater. The galaxy had once valued age, tradition, and control. Now it valued curiosity, courage, and care. And much of that shift came from watching how humans handled second chances, not with arrogance, but with gratitude. There were still challenges, of course. Not every species trusted the new way. Some old powers clung to their hierarchies. Disagreements happened. But instead of reaching for weapons, the sphere reached for dialogue. Mediators, trained in human conflict resolution methods mixed with alien wisdom, helped find common ground. Mistakes were admitted, apologies were made, and slowly trust grew. What made it all work was that no one claimed to have all the answers. Humans didn't pretend to be perfect. They still argued, still made errors, still struggled with their own impulses, but they owned it. They said, "We're learning," and that honesty opened doors no force ever could. And Earth? It became the place where the galaxy came to remember why connection matters. Pilgrims didn't visit to see monuments of war or halls of power. They came to stand on a quiet hill in New Zealand and watch the sunrise over the Pacific. The same view early humans saw when they first wondered what was beyond the horizon. They visited libraries in Cairo where ancient human scrolls sat beside digital archives from a dozen worlds. They walked through peace gardens in Geneva, where a single tree, planted by hands of many species, grew strong under Earth's sun. The Council's judgment had tried to erase humanity from history. Instead, it gave them the space to rewrite what civilization could be. Not a pyramid with one species on top, but a circle where everyone had a seat. And the most beautiful part? It kept evolving. New discoveries came not just from labs, but from conversations over shared meals. A human poet's words inspired an alien engineer to design a gentler engine. A Velnari lullaby helped human doctors calm trauma patients. Innovation wasn't just about machines, it was about mixing hearts and minds. A century after their exile, humans weren't just accepted, they were admired, not for being flawless, but for being real, for showing that strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise when you do, and as starships, human-made, alien-built, or something in between, lifted off from Earth's surface every day. Heading to new frontiers, they carried more than cargo. They carried hope, the kind of hope that says, we don't have to be the same to belong. We just have to care. The galaxy had once shut the door on humanity. But humans didn't kick it down. They built a new one, wide enough for everyone to walk through together. And on the other side wasn't just a future, it was a home,